welcome everyone to our last session of workshops. There are some others going on at the current time, but we have another one after this, so please don't take off yet. There's another one by one of our keynote speakers right after this one, 2:15. So in the interest of getting you all to that one, I don't want to finish late, but I do want to leave some time at the end of today's talk for questions. So as you're going through and listening to this, I hope that parts of it are provocative enough that you have some questions, and write those down, and we'll talk about those later. I don't want to say I'm going to answer questions. I'd much rather field them and maybe throw them back at somebody else and see if we can get a conversation going. All right, the talk title is "The Dwarves Are for the Dwarves," and right off the bat, I'm going to have to apologize to the C.S. Lewis fans out there. Yes, I know Lewis does not spell dwarfs with a V. Right? It's dwarfs with an F. Right? I have it on good authority from the Narnia Chronicles. But I'm kind of a Tolkien guy in that regard. And dwarves matches up with elves and so on and so on. It just seems more consistent. But it's technically dwarfs, so later on you'll see it as dwarfs. So I hope that you'll forgive me for that slight modification there. All right, what we're talking about today has to do with trade and current events and certain policies that are being proposed. And I'll do my best not to name any names today. I may slip once or twice, but I will try really hard not to name any names because I don't want to cast aspersions. You'll probably figure out what I'm talking about anyway. So, the consequences of economic tribalism. When I first learned about what the topic was going to be for this year's focus, which we heard at the end of last year, this title popped into my head immediately, without even thinking about anything else. He said it's about nationalism and America, American exceptionalism perhaps, and so on. And I'm not exactly sure why, but this is what popped into my head, and it's still here. Couldn't get rid of it. So what I thought of was the story of the dwarves at the end of The Last Battle. That's the last book by publication in the Lewis Narnia Chronicles series. And in that book, there are some dwarves. And there's a battle, as you might have guessed from the title, The Last Battle. And the dwarves fight, and various sorts of things happen. And then Aslan, most of you know how this works, Aslan, the great lion, takes everybody to his country. And that includes the dwarves, who are very often bad guys. Right? Everyone else that's there, even Uncle Diggory and Polly, Eustace is there, Edmund, so on and so forth. They are experiencing blue skies and sunshine and fresh air, and it feels like June. They've just come from a battlefield, and standing in this on Stable Hill is this door. It's just a doorway. There's a door in it, but you can walk all the way around it. It's one of those magical doors you open up and go through, and you're in a different place, but you can walk all the way around it. And so they've come through the door, and the dwarves are sitting around in a circle, tight little circle. The kids, sometimes they're kids, sometimes they're grown queens and kings and so on and so forth, try to talk to them. And the dwarves make it very clear that they don't know where they are. They think they're in a dark, smelly stable. And nobody can convince them otherwise. They put things in their face, some flowers in their face, and it smells like old hay or something. Aslan creates an entire banquet for them of wonderful food and goblets of, can I say this at Spring Arbor? Wine? And they think that it's water out of a trough that a donkey had his nose in. I have no idea what that tastes like. They just can't see because they won't see. Aslan describes their situation as they have been put in a position where they're so distrustful of basically everyone other than themselves that they won't listen to anything. They can't see anything. They can't experience the blessings that are right there for them, the good things that are right there all around them. They're so distrustful that they just miss the whole thing. And that was the idea that stuck into my head, is that with respect to things we're going to talk about today, we're often in that situation, and what we're experiencing in this country is that kind of myopia, I believe, where we're not seeing what wonderful things we have. Now, the talk that was in this room before me talked about American exceptionalism and how much better things are and so on and so forth. I believe all of that's true, but I believe we may be at a turning point where we're going to waste all of that or refuse to accept that it's even there and not appropriate the blessings that are there. So that's the idea behind this. After this, not too much about dwarves and things like that, but that was the idea is there are things going on. We have this mindset of us versus them that is depriving us of seeing what God has for us and also what God wants us to do. On what basis do we decide that those guys are the bad guys? I talked about this a little bit in one of my classes recently. I have some personal theories. I haven't done a lot of study on it. I won't regale you with those. But we have a very strong sense that there are people out there that we don't even know who live over there that we can't trust. That we should somehow cut them off because they might do bad things to us. Now, if we have good evidence for that, right, their planes are overhead, their troops are on our soil, okay, we might conclude that they don't have our best interests at heart. But they're mostly just over there. And we're not talking about military kinds of things. Here, we're talking about commerce, basically. Markets, trade, those kinds of things. Now, culture is important, ethnicity is important, language is important, all those kinds of things. So this doesn't have anything to do with that. They're all related, but we're only going to be talking about the concept of trade and the benefits of trade and what we're giving up because we think of those people over there as beneath us somehow, that we're going to trade with them and that we can be self-sufficient. The use of the word us in this context goes back several hundred years, depending upon who you read. Mercantilism goes back maybe to the 16th century, the 1500s. It definitely goes to the 17th and 18th centuries, up to and past the time of Adam Smith writing The Wealth of Nations. So what mercantilism does is it treats countries as if they're just one thing. As the quote up there says, as if it's a large firm, a company of some sort. It's just one thing, and it's homogeneous inside. There aren't any individuals or anything like it, it's just one thing. Think of a big amoeba or something like that. And it can be managed that way. So when somebody says the country, it's just one thing. And there's no awareness of the millions of individuals, all their hopes and dreams and occupations and families and all of the different ages and all those kinds of things. It's just one thing. And you can run it like a company, like you're the CEO of a company. You just issue orders and people do things. There's also the sense that other countries are our competitors and they want us out of the way. That's what competitors want. If you can become a monopoly, great, then I can raise prices and make more profits and so on and so forth. Again, it's a mercantilist idea that all countries, I'm going to mix up countries and companies several times today probably, all countries are in the kind of competition where they all want us to go away. And we'll find out that's not really the case either. But if we can't see that, then we miss the blessings of having the interaction with those other countries. Millions and millions and millions, if I were Carl Sagan, I'd be saying billions and billions, but lots of people, and billions, and that's not an exaggeration, of decisions, exchanges every day. Lots and lots and lots of people, all different, doing all kinds of things, and doing different things all the time. As circumstances change, people change what they decide to do, and they get into new businesses, get out of businesses, have new families, things happen, circumstances happen, and everything changes all the time. It's not just one thing, it's a lot of things. So when we have that many people, why are they all doing all of that exchanging? For you econ students, you've had this before, so you take a short nap. But the idea is if two people are going to exchange, two parties are going to exchange, and it's voluntary, nobody's got a gun, both of them think they're going to be better off as a result of the trade. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Okay? Now, if they're being forced, that's different. Robber comes up behind you, puts a gun to your head, says your money or your life. That's different. In that situation, you're going to lose your money, keep your life, if you're smart, and the result is going to be he wins, you lose. But if two people come together and have something that they want to exchange, each of them, because they're in that transaction, wants to have what the other one has, They agree on the exchange, they exchange, and both of them are thereby better off. And so this is a weird way to think about it, but at that point, simply by moving goods that are valued less from the place where they're valued less to the place where they're valued more, wealth is increased. People are better off. Benefits. Anything that interferes with that obviously has to interfere with the creation of wealth that way. Just moving things around. You actually don't have to make any new stuff for that to happen. Just move it around. If it goes to somebody who can use it, it's more valuable. And sometimes the value goes beyond, oftentimes it goes beyond the person who is in the exchange. Example I've used in class is if I had a Stradivarius violin, I don't know, I could beat my dog with it or something, but other than that, no use to me at all. Right? Nothing. Put it in the hands of a virtuoso violinist, and not only she is going to enjoy it, but everybody who listens to it. It would have the opposite effect if I tried to play it. So simply moving that from me to him makes him or her better off and also makes everybody else better off. That's the idea of trade. Just moving things makes people better off without even creating. Of course, creating is part of the whole process as well. That's the part that's easiest to see. If you're going to if you create something new, then of course that's new wealth, right? And by the way, wealth doesn't necessarily money, those kinds of things. If you create a process that allows you to make something faster with fewer resources, that frees up time to be with your family, be at church, right? To do charitable work, whatever. That's wealth too. Wealth is whatever people value. It's not restricted to just money, gold, and things like that. In order to have exchange with the kind of standard of living that we have to have a division of labor. And this is an old idea. You're all familiar with this passage. I won't do an exegesis or anything like that. But clearly in the church, everybody doesn't do the same thing because everyone doesn't have the same gifts. And that's one of the best evidences that I know of that we're not all supposed to be exactly alike. Because God doesn't want us to be all alike. He wants some of us to have this gift and that gift and this gift and that gift and so on. And to use it for his glory. That's the point. So it's an old idea that if we want to accomplish something, we divide the labor. But we also have to cooperate in getting done whatever it is we're going to do. The cooperation and exchange is necessary because if I happen to be really good, for example, at making shoes, that's my specialty, and I make shoes and I can make good shoes and I can make them pretty efficiently and so on. If that's all I can do and we don't have any exchange, I starve to death. I can't eat shoes. That's why that line is there and trust is underneath that. Okay? The whole system depends upon a certain amount of trust. If I'm not sure, pretty sure, that somebody's going to want my shoes and is willing to trade food for my shoes or will buy my shoes so I can use money to buy food, I can't take a chance, can I? Because I'll die. I have to start thinking about, oh, I need to be self-sufficient because I can't trust those people. Have you heard anything recently, maybe on the news, about being self-sufficient because we can't trust those people and we need to fend for ourselves and so on? Yeah, the dwarves are for the dwarves. That's the idea. So trust underlying the whole system is really, really important. When that goes away, the whole system collapses. There's nothing there. That's why a little bit of pessimism about our society today, because I think that's what's happening in part, is we're beginning to lose trust in people that we don't even know. There's no reason to lose trust in them. If somebody has a reason, that's okay, all right, if they betray you. And the dwarves had been betrayed, actually. They'd been lied to. But they had evidence around them and so on, and they simply were unwilling to see. As Aslan put it, they were so afraid of being taken in, they couldn't be taken out. That's the way he put it. So if you get to that point, then the system collapses, and you end up in a dark stable sitting on straw. That's the ultimate result of all of that. All right, globalization here is in quotes because people differ on what this means. Depends on your perspective, I suppose. I like this one because you notice it doesn't have anything about one world government or somebody being in charge or armies going this way or that way or any coercion anywhere. Globalization is basically just letting people do what they can do. They will make things, they'll support their families, they'll form communities, they'll work together. Now, there are going to be bad apples. Okay? Scripture's clear about that. Okay? And that's why certain authorities have been instituted. Communities can gather together and organize self-defense and so on and so forth. But this kind of globalization doesn't involve any of the political factors that you often hear about with respect to globalization. Down at the bottom, you see the name Donald Boudreaux. I have to do this for credit purposes. I doubt that anybody really reads a lot of Don Boudreaux, but I have to give him credit because a lot of this is probably pretty close to channeling Don Boudreaux. I read him fairly often, and I like the way he writes. He's great with an analogy. He's a good arguer, and so on. There are some things he says that I don't agree with, but for the most part, a lot of what you're hearing today are arguments that would, if they're not exactly what he would say, they're very close to what he would say. I basically probably have his voice now. He says political boundaries are not really important. In fact, they get in the way. This is the Haskell Free Library. Anybody heard of this library? This is unusual. It's sort of in Vermont. I say sort of because it's sort of in Canada too. In fact, that black line right there is the international boundary. That's Canada on one side and Vermont on the other. Pretty significant, isn't it? You see how different things are on both sides of that line. Clearly, these people probably don't even talk to each other. There's still rules. You think, it's one building. Come on. You carry books back and forth and have conversations and so on and so forth. But if you go in the American door, you can't go out the Canada door. If you go in the Canada door, you can't go out the American door. There it is. That's what Boudreaux's talking about. Right? Is that silly? That really makes that much difference? But there it is. The best example I can find of the most ridiculous boundary that I've ever seen is that one right there. Now, the whole northern boundary of the United States between us and Canada is pretty much that way, out in the woods and every place else. But this one goes right through a building. So. All right, some misconceptions. Again, the dwarves think they're eating straw. One of them thinks he's got an old turnip. Another one thinks he's got some raw cabbage. So misconceptions are like that. This is one that's rampant right now. Exports are good. Imports are bad. Classic mercantilism. Exports are good. Imports are bad. We take a look at that for just a second. Here's typical import for us, flat screen TVs and so on. I think this is at Target. Yeah, that's what the cart says. And these folks are buying televisions made someplace else. I don't know where Apexes are made, but made someplace else. And that's what we visualize as an import. So we have people who take home televisions, and they watch them and they enjoy the goods and so on and so forth. Okay? What's on the other side of that exchange? Well, they pay for them with money. Now, obviously, it goes to Target. Target gets it from somebody else and so on and so forth. But on the other side of the exchange is money. Green pieces of paper with dead politicians' pictures on it. Okay? It's just paper, right? It's paper. So if we stop the transaction right here, who's ahead? The mercantilists would say, well, clearly the seller, because they've got the money. And that passage in Scripture that talks about the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Right? Well, an obsession with money is the root of all sorts of foolishness. Mercantilism says these people, the seller, they've got money. What's important is money, 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 money. But in reality, green pieces of paper. And on the other side, you've got TVs, or whatever happens to be. I had some lovely blueberries last week. Wonderful blueberries. Whenever I eat blueberries, like middle of summer, right? It was like summer, from Peru. That was cool. And it was a good price, too. So, unheard of. 100 years ago? Well, 50 years ago. It's February in Michigan. Right? You can't get blueberries, but you can. Fresh blueberries. Beautiful. Middle of winter. Who's ahead? Me with the blueberries, right? Yes. That's not the way mercantilists think. It's the money that's important. And so if you're following current events at all, you're going to hear that sort of thing. This doesn't mean anything. This is bad. Buying stuff and having things that are valuable to us is bad. Money is good. Right? So the person who gets the money is on the good side. These are the bad guys. Right? We don't want them to have this part. This is the good part. They've got this. All we've got is stuff. And we got to do something about that so that all of this stays here. That's the idea of mercantilism. Now, at one time, it was gold, and you just try to pile up gold and so on. And some mercantilist countries, I did it again, countries actually forbid skilled workmen to leave the country. There was so much us and them that they didn't want these people to take what they knew and help other countries, because it was all competition. Those are the bad guys. We're the good guys. Right? So we just pile up and pile up and pile up things. They did not worry about the standard of living of their own people. Another misconception. We'll come back to the other thing, by the way. Companies are either exporters or importers. We have this image that, okay, this company's an exporter and that company's an importer. And maybe we have a particular policy and it helps our exporters because exports are good. And the importers, we don't care about them anyway. Right? So we're going to help the exporters, and that'll make everybody better off. Oops. Turns out the country's not a big amoeba. Things are very, very complex in the United States. Lots of other countries too. Ours is the most complex. Top 1% of U.S. exporters, 90% of them are also importers. The top 1% of importers, 96% of them are also exporters. So which way are you going to go? Who are you going to help? And if you penalize importers by helping out the exporters, each one of them does the other thing as well. And so if you're trying to help the exporter, you hurt them on the import side. The complexity is pretty much invisible because can you imagine trying to manage this? To grasp this, for a politician to have all this in their head at one time so they could say, this is what we should do. It's just overwhelming. Here's a graph that shows some intermediate goods, kinds of things that come in. These are imports based upon what they're used for. And if you see those last two bars, the black one and the brown one there, those are the kinds of things if you want to think about going into manufacturing. Okay? So they're the equipment, materials, capital goods, machines, and so on and so forth. And that amounts to almost 60%. So more than half. Most of our imports are not the kinds of things that we think of, like those televisions. Normally, when we think of imports, we think TVs and things like that. We should not buy those. We should buy them here, and so on and so forth. But most of the imports aren't consumer goods. Those are those things. And if you look down here, you see that middle word right there. It says feed. Okay? Food and feed. What's the difference? Well, feed is for animals, right? So this is manufacturing, but farms are too. They feed cattle, and they don't manufacture cows, but it's a process. And this shows clearly that if we just focus on this, for example, most of what's going on is something else. And if we start making decisions that harm most of this in favor of that, then things get distorted. You want to guess? Walmart's #1 selling item. Good job, Morris. Yes. Who would have guessed, right? We think of bananas as that's a consumer good. All right. Because we eat them, right? It's a consumer good for us. But for Walmart, it's not. For Walmart, it's inventory. And think about Walmart as a business. We think of manufacturing companies, like Ford and something like that. You think of factories. And, okay, we understand how things are being made. But what does Walmart make for us? They make convenience for us. And they make things available that wouldn't otherwise be available. And they make them cheap, and so on and so on. That whole business model requires things like this. So there's at least an argument that this kind of stuff for Walmart is an intermediate good. And if we do that, this is going to go around twice now, those bananas. Okay. Over 95% of imports are intermediate goods. Not consumer goods, they're intermediate goods. So if you cut those off, what you're cutting off are the inputs to domestic businesses. Remember, we're trying to protect domestic businesses, right, from the bad guys overseas. Well, if you cut the bad guys off overseas, then the people here don't have anything to work with, and they're out of business. You can't separate them. They're like this. You can't separate them. One more time with the bananas. All right. All right, so let's take a look at some of the significance and quickly through some charts here. You know where we're headed. Top state exports. I am not an expert on these things. If you ask me questions about why in this particular year Texas' main export was computer and electronic products, I have no idea. I look at some of these things. Michigan's easy. Transportation equipment, we knew that, right? But that's not all that goes on in Michigan, is it? So even with a map like this, and we look at this state by state, we're doing the same thing. We're treating the state of Michigan as if it's one thing, not just a geographical area, arbitrary, that has a whole bunch of people in it, and a whole bunch of businesses, and everybody doing things, and doing things differently. Hard to get away from that. The boundaries, artificial. The two boundaries that I tend to have in my mind are the one across the Haskell Library, that's a line, and the other one, because I'm an old guy, is the Berlin Wall. That was a boundary you could see, right? Not a happy boundary at all. So you look at some of these things, transportation equipment. This makes sense, right? Cars, etc. New York, diamonds. Diamonds, export. Okay? So the tendency is to think of things are either made there or they're mined there or they come from there originally. But what you're going to see is things go back and forth and they move around. And you can't just say that this is from there or that's from there. A lot of times we don't even know. Things are from so many places. All right. This is 2015. Okay, so you take a look at some of these exports. These are imports. There's Michigan. What a surprise. Our main export is transportation equipment. Our main import is parts for transportation equipment. What a surprise. Hey, let's cut off the imports and just keep doing what we do, right? Can't do that. Can't cut one off and have the other one. They're connected. They're the same thing. So there are imports. I always get a kick out of Wisconsin. Sweaters. Yeah, I can see that. Well, there. I thought that would be Minnesota, but they're probably just burning the crude oil to stay warm. Some of these don't make any sense at all to me. I look at this, Tennessee, laptops. What is that? Everybody had a sudden urge to buy laptops that year. Just a strange thing. Look at how many places are crude oil in this particular year, 2015. All right, sorry about this. Couldn't get one cut in half, but this is just 1 year later. 1 year later. So Michigan, the same. This is car parts and trucks, so pretty much the same. But a lot of other things have changed quite a bit. Texas is back to what you would expect. They're exporting petroleum products. Right? That makes sense for them. Louisiana, on the other hand, lots of refineries there. Soybeans. I don't know. Arizona, airplane parts. Okay, airplane parts. That was their import. Okay. What was their export? Computer and electronic product. Okay, they're high-techy down in Arizona, right? Imports, 2016. Tomatoes. What is that? Tomatoes. I thought maybe Heinz had a big factory there or something. I think they may. I can't figure out why that would be there. But if you look at some of these, they changed drastically. This is just 1 year. Here's, let me go to Alaska here. Fish in 2015. Maybe they ran out of fish. But now it's zinc ores. Again, this is by dollar volume. That's the only way they measure these things, just by dollar volume. So who can keep track of this? Change all the time. Imports change, exports change, the countries where these come from change, everything changes. All right, a little bit on Michigan. I saw Michigan already with the car parts and so on and so forth. These are exports to Mexico. The dark brown ones are the states that have the most exports to Mexico. So you got big old California, And you got big old Texas, and in third place, Michigan. Michigan. $12 billion in exports. Now, do you think all of the talk about NAFTA and getting rid of that and so on might have an impact on Michigan? The person who's making a lot of those decisions obviously isn't real happy with California anyway, having lost that state by 2 million votes and something like that last election. Maybe, oh no, I think it was more like 4 million. Right? Texas, I'm not too sure about. But you can see where if you made decisions based upon these people or these people, it's going to affect Michigan. Is anybody thinking about us? We're going to stick somebody somewhere, but who's going to pay? Maybe it's people in Michigan. This is, I think, a remarkable statistic. This is the average trade share. This is based upon how much total production of the state. There's some criteria for that, but basically, gross domestic product of the state is everything that the state produces. How much of it is international trade? Number one in the country is Michigan. 38% of our GDP is connected to international trade. So do we want that cut off? What happens to Michigan when, the dwarfs are for the dwarfs and we aren't the dwarfs? Dwarfs live in Washington, in case you're wondering. It's D.C., District of. Huge impact. Next year it could be somebody else. Obviously it's going to affect California and Texas and Louisiana and some others here, but Michigan most of all. All right. The United States as a whole. Again, we tend to think of trade as exports as being one kind of thing. The United States exports is this kind of thing, corn or something like that, and then we import other stuff. So what we want is to encourage our people to grow more of that other stuff or make more of that other stuff, so let's cut off the imports. So this is what we export. So it's not going to be easy. I'll go back and forth a couple times, but machines, engines, pumps, electronic equipment, aircraft, spacecraft, you'll find this is the one that we do more than anybody else. Vehicles, oil, so on and so forth. All right, let me go to what we import. That's what we export. It's the same stuff. Now, if you're thinking of the country as just one thing, it doesn't make any sense. The country isn't one thing. It's millions of people. And they're all doing all kinds of things all the time. And so electronic equipment is number one import. It's number two export. Okay? Machines is number two here. It's number one there. And so on. So we cut off imports. What happens? It's the same systems. So what would be happening is somebody would be going into those systems and basically just grabbing a hold of them and giving them a twist and hoping that they didn't all break and fall apart. Okay? This is not a finely tuned machine because it changes all the time. But millions of decisions go on every day to keep this thing going. And somebody coming in from outside and saying, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. We're cutting off China or France or whatever it happens to be. A little bit of a summary. You can't disentangle the exporting and the importing. That exports are good, imports are bad thing. It's just nonsense. All right, I'll deal with something kind of technical here, I guess. Bilateral trade deficits. Oh, this is where eyes glaze over. Bilateral trade deficits. What that means is us and China, for example. Not us in the world, but us and China. We have a bilateral trade deficit with China. Of course, deficit's a bad word. It has to do with deficiency. Nobody likes budget deficits and so on. But what does the deficit mean? It means that we buy more from China than they buy from us, which means they end up with the green pieces of paper and we end up with the stuff. So far, who's ahead? So you could describe that as a deficit, but only if you're talking about the money, the mercantile thing, the mercantilist thing. If you're talking about the stuff, we're ahead. So we actually have a goods surplus. And looking at it. Before I do a bit of an exercise, one of the things that is very hard to figure out is even in bilateral deficit situations, what counts as an export, like China? Okay? So this is an example, and a couple of these. This Barbie doll, not this particular one, I just found a picture. Import price, the price at the dock in China is $2 for that doll. And then it comes over here and they get marketing and all kinds of other things and charge a lot more for it. All the stuff for that doll gets imported into China. Imported into China. Then China adds 35 cents worth of assembly, and on it goes. So, did we import that from China or from someplace else? How does that work? Right? Who even knows what the definitions are? Who keeps track of that stuff? I mean, the hair comes from one place, the dress comes from another place, and so on and so on. Okay? Those get imported, they get put together, and then we look at China and say, look at all the stuff we're getting from China. Well, no, we got most of Barbie there from Japan and Thailand and some other places. This is true of the stuff that we already talked about between Mexico and Michigan, for example. Every $100 of goods we import from Mexico already has $40 of American goods that were exported to Mexico. Well, Mexico imports stuff too, so how much other stuff is in that stuff that we import? So again, who knows? All right, here's a question for you. This is an easy way to figure out how to think about these things. What's your trade deficit with McDonald's? Anybody here work at McDonald's? Anybody who works at McDonald's? Okay. Unless you just hate McDonald's. Everybody in this room is running a bilateral trade deficit with McDonald's. Oh, the horrors. Why? Because you buy more from them than they buy from you. How many of you have lost sleep over that? Who cares? Who cares? It'll even out eventually. We don't worry about it. Okay? That's the way the system works. There are bilateral trade deficits all over the place. You know, the money on the other side, what happens to that money? It's someplace else, isn't it? You think they just sit on that, people in other countries? Hey, I can spend this. I love these pictures of American politicians. No. Those dollars come back. And that's what pays for our exports. Otherwise, you're thinking, export is good, great. How do they pay for our exports if they don't have any dollars? Well, where are they going to get dollars from? We buy their exports, our imports. System, all connected. You can't take pieces out and have the whole thing work. All right, more jargon, technical terms, but you hear about the trade balance and so on? That's half of a balance sheet. So what happens if that money goes over to France, let's say, and they don't spend it on exports? They got to use it for something. That's the capital account. They invest in the United States. They either lend us money or they buy stuff here or something like that. For example, this will rub some of you the wrong way. The top 5 most American cars are Toyota, Honda, Toyota, Honda, Honda. And then along comes Chevy Traverse, GMC Acadia, and Buick Enclave. And that's it. Notice those are all from Michigan. Yeah. Okay. These and this, that's the capital account. That's money coming into this country as a result of our buying imports. Now, a lot of this happens here. It never gets out of the country, okay? Because they sell cars here and so on and so forth. But they invest in businesses here in the United States. That's a good thing, right? People get jobs. How many jobs? A lot of jobs. This is the U.S. Assembly Plant employees supported per model. There's the Toyota Camry. How many workers work there? Sometimes referred to as insourcing, sort of outsourcing, right? That's where we have people in other countries make our stuff. This is where people in other countries have us make their stuff. This is a good place to have a business. It's very safe, got good infrastructure, people are educated, well-trained, right? Lots of space, right? So far, not a very corrupt government, and so on. Okay? Great place to have a business. This is Americans employed by foreign companies, 2015. There's Michigan, 250,000 people in Michigan are employed by foreign countries, foreign companies, there we go, foreign companies. That's money coming back. That's how that works. So, imports good, imports bad, exports good. This is the dwarves sitting around saying, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. I want to believe that those people are untrustworthy. I don't believe anything they say. I don't have anything to do with them. Okay, fine. Sit here in your stable and eat straw. Producers have good lobbies. If they can get a tariff passed, that's a tax on you, because you're going to pay higher prices. A lot of times we think, oh, we're going to stick those people from France or whatever. It doesn't stick the people from France. You know, the companies that can't compete anymore, they lose their jobs and so on and so forth. But over here, we pay higher prices for everything, because now our less efficient companies are the only ones who are making and selling something. Here's just an odd consideration. I didn't have a better place to put this, but we're currently engaged in trade sanctions. We want to make Russia hurt, right? What do? We cut off their trade. Well, wait a second. I thought that cutting off trade made us richer. Isn't that the idea? We cut off our trade with other people and we're better off as a result of it? Well, if we are, why during times of war do we set up blockades and embargoes and things like that? Because we know that cutting off trade hurts a country. It doesn't help them, it hurts them. And that's what George points out here, is that protectionism teaches us, do to ourselves in time of peace, that would be like right now, what our enemies seek to do to us in times of war. So a war tactic is to cut off somebody's trade, because everybody knows it makes them worse off. And yet we're talking about cutting ourselves off, sitting in our stable. And lastly, what are some effects for us as Christians of this sort of inward-looking, bad guys out there, can't trust those people? Without getting into the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans were those people, right? We don't have, yuck. I don't touch that guy. He's a bad guy. We don't like those people. Should we have that attitude about, we don't even know, they're just over there someplace. We can't go over there, how do we help people? We're going to be self-sufficient and just be ourselves. Just be over here by ourselves. By the way, the United States is, if you had to pick one place on the planet that could get along the longest, being all by itself, it'd be the United States. Okay? We got more stuff, more people, we're big enough, we got resources, so on and so forth. Okay? But, sorry Walmart, no more bananas. You don't get bananas or blueberries in February, and so on. The idea of the division of labor is that if you specialize in something, you can make either a lot more of it, you can make it a lot cheaper, you can make things you couldn't make before. All of those things. That enables us to go all over the world and pull all kinds of people who haven't had the advantages of the American exceptionalism, if you went to the last presentation, haven't had all the benefits that we have in America. Here, boom, right now. You don't have to go through an industrial revolution and have kids working in mines and things like that. You can have it all right now. All our technology, all our know-how, everything. Boom, right now. Unless, of course, we're not allowed to go over there. So some of you are probably thinking, well, wait a second, it's only imports we're cutting off. We're still exporting, right? Well, remember, if they don't have any money, they can't buy our exports. And how are they going to get money and so on? The system has to work together. You can't just cut one side off. The whole thing falls apart. So what is it ultimately? It's about waste. Distrust causes waste. Now there's risk in trust, right? Let me replace risk with the word faith. It takes some faith. But when we have it, amazing things happen. If those dwarves just had a little faith, what they could have had. No, they sat there in the dark, ate raw cabbage and old turnips and straw. Thank you very much. I will take some questions, comments. I'll give you a few minutes to maybe get your notes. A lot of stats I threw at you, so. I didn't mention any names, did I? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Got pretty close, probably. Mitch, is that a question back there? Yes. You can make it work, but it's like the drug deal that you see in movies, okay? Always with the aluminum suitcase, and one of them's is full of money. Remember, money's always on one side of this thing. The other one's full of white powder, talcum or something like that. And you know, how does the transaction work? The guys come together. Each one of them's got their 2 or 3 thugs, okay, armed, and the transaction has to happen like in real time here, like that. Transaction cost of that, having to meet and trade things like that, as opposed to sending a check and having something shipped from who knows where. My wife just got me something that came in a box. I got home, it was in a box, I was pretty excited. I took it out, was looking at it. It was made in Israel. Cool, all right? I never had anything made in Israel. That would not happen. No way, no way. It takes a tremendous amount of trust. Without a lot of enforcement. And then if you have a lot of enforcement, it's expensive. Go. Half of us would starve to death or more. Okay, barter is extraordinarily inefficient. Okay? You know, I've got a cow and I want a horse. I have to find somebody that's got a horse and wants a cow, and you know, it's just really hard. And if I did this in class yesterday, I think. If I've got a horse and I want 2 chickens, they take the horse for the chickens, but I want change back for my horse. And, you know, so how does that work? You can beat a dead horse, but you can't ride one. So where do you go with that? Right? So barter works. Small groups, face to face. There's some barter clubs, I think, out there. You bring a bunch of stuff, and people bring a bunch of stuff, and you try to trade back and forth. But would you want to have to depend on that to live? Ooh, wow. Yes.
So one of definitely international trade rates working too heavy, versus digital economy. But one thing, especially that has been a downside since has been the labor conditions of certain countries that don't have or strongly enforced civil rights laws. So in terms of like a trade ethic, should we trade less with countries that have others that don't pay their workers as well? Could we try to incentivize them in some way to do that, or
Right. Well, let me just ask this question. Under what circumstances is it a good thing to reduce people's options? That's what you're suggesting. I mean, if you take away the horrible place where they're working, does that make them better off? If they're volunteers, they chose to work there because they thought that that was better than their other option. So as long as it's voluntary, that makes all the difference in the world. Okay? All the difference in the world. If you've got slave labor and so on, totally different with you all the way. But if it's voluntary, you know, who are you or I to look at that and say, oh, you shouldn't work there. Okay? I know better than you do about how you should live your life. I'm going to shut down that factory, and you can go back to standing on the street corner and making money the way you used to. So, again, the compassion is absolutely appropriate and necessary. Compassionately hurting people, probably not as a good idea.
So I was going to ask, can a similar attitude be taken up when we talk about policies regarding immigration? Like, when people come here, people consider immigrants who come from Mexico, maybe, just as an example, as a cost, and not as people who produce or add value to the country. Can we consider that in the same way? Or, you know, what are the pros and cons of, like, having that kind of immigration?
Well, if you can tell from the way I opened my remarks, those are individuals. Right? Even if you use the word immigrants, I don't see a group, a class, an amoeba with nothing in there. I see individual people. And so, you know, if you stop the mad bomber from coming over, yes. Right? If you stop the person who's going to make a great scientific discovery, no. Right? Well, here's the question, how do you know which is which? And who's going to decide? And where do they get that kind of power? And again, you mentioned coming here. What about the private property rights of people who are already here? Can they be compelled to house people, for example, and so on? We have a mixed economy. We have welfare programs and so on and so forth. We have taxes. And you know, we're pretty happy with doing that sort of thing, helping people who need it and so on and so forth. Is it possible to overwhelm a system like ours? Yeah. That's actually, I think, the Cloward Piven strategy is to get so many people on welfare that the system crashes. I don't think that's going to happen here, but some people thought that was a strategy for actually bringing down the system. If you see an old movie called Exodus, a very, very old movie, I think 60s or something, about the Jews returning to Israel, they had a couple different strategies. This is the Jews at that time. One of them was terrorism, blowing things up, and the other one was just moving in. And so, you know, the strategy is an old strategy. It works. Much better to, I don't want to use the word assimilate because that sounds like you're trying to change people into things that they shouldn't be. But for everyone, if we could get beyond the us and them, which doesn't require changing anybody's culture or language or any of those kinds of things. I mean, I can look at Josh and maybe we need an interpreter. In fact, we do. He's a math guy, so I don't understand that at all. And if he's got something that I want, I've got something that he wants, or I've got money and buy it from him and he can pay somebody else for it, we can do that. I'm not asking to move in with him, okay? We can do that. That's why, remember at the beginning, I limited this to just the exchange part, just trade. Right? Once you start getting people's houses and telling them what they should eat and things like that, different, very different. Right? But that arm's length transaction where I just look and say, hey, I got this and this and this, would you be interested? He can say no. That's okay. Nothing bad happens there. If I can go to some politician and say, hey, make him buy my stuff, now we got something else again. Right? Or he goes to a politician and says, people like him shouldn't sell stuff like that. Right? Even though he's perfectly within his rights to just say, no, I don't want it. That's it. So I'm talking about pure trade, okay? Just pure exchange, not the cultural kinds of things, and so on and so forth. Be careful not to do that. I know better than to wade into that swamp. It's dangerous in there. How many of you were surprised by the statistics about Michigan? Who we are and what we do here? Yeah. Right? Anybody who starts making decisions for the whole country without taking into account those kinds of things is going to cause some real grief in certain places. Right? Can't avoid it. And the one-size-fits-all policies, almost always a bad idea. People will make mistakes, right? Lots of examples in business, but they don't crash whole countries. Let's see a country that was crashed by one guy. Look up Zimbabwe. It's really sad. Again, good people, one guy. All right, if anybody would like to stay after or chat about any of these things, I pushed the edge on some things. I did that on purpose. I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes, but you've got to get over someplace at 2:15. Dr. Chan, do you know where the next session is? Is it Whiteman Gibbs? Do you know? Yeah, okay, look on the poster. It's there. Thank you for coming.